Well, good morning, and thanks again for attending the Liberate Yourself by Looking Within program from Columbus Karma Tiksum Choling. My name is Kathy Wesley, and I represent the Columbus Karma Tiksum Choling Buddhist Meditation Center. We're delighted and pleased to have Lama Tsultrim Yeshe with us today, sharing about the topic. I'm going to read a little bit to you about Lama Yeshe. Lama Yeshe became a student of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's in 1989. He completed the first traditional Tibetan 3-year retreat at the Karmeling Retreat Center in Delhi, New York, led by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, who was the founder of our center, his center, and the KTD monastery. Upon finishing retreat in 1996, Lama Yeshe received the title of Lama, meaning teacher. He received novice monastic vows from His Eminence Taisi Rinpoche in 1994 and full ordination from Trungpa Rinpoche in 2008. Lama Yeshe is a retired prison chaplain and also taught sociology at the university level. He lives in Wisconsin, where he is the director of a meditation center and teaches at Dharma centers throughout North America. So we're just pleased and delighted to have Lama Yeshe with us today. And I think I'm going to ask the host to spotlight his video, and we'll turn things over to you, Lama Yeshe. So thank you.
Good morning. Palden Zawe Lama Rinpoche Taki Chiwar Pede Denjula Kadran Genpo Gone Jason Zay Kusan Tuki Nodrib Sol Du Sol. So again, good morning to all of you. And the inspiration for the two talks today comes from the 7 points of mind training. I was invited to the Columbus KTC to give this series of talks, and they wanted me to pick a topic. And I have a series of cards with the individual sayings of mind training or the slogans of mind training in my kitchen. And the slogan that was up that day was find freedom through investigation and examination. And that is where I said, that is the topic. That is a good one to go into at Columbus. So I am going to start out with a brief discussion of the 7 points of mind training, and then this particular slogan. And as Lama Kathy said, I will pause in a few places for questions. So if you have a question, write it down if you need to remember it. And then we'll have a discussion after that, and then I'll go back to the teaching. Well, the 7 points of mind training are Mahayana teachings, and they are teachings for us to follow, to learn how to let go of our ego clinging, how to determine what is right and what is wrong, different practices to do, and so on. But the general idea is to reduce our ego clinging, to actually put ourselves at a lower point than other people. Rinpoche explained it this way, that if you have a paper, a sheet of paper, and I'm reaching for a sheet of paper. If you have a sheet of paper and you have curled it up tightly I'm not going to curl this up real tightly because these are some prayers. But if you curl it up really tightly and then you let it go, it will not lay flat. And the way to remedy that is curl it up tightly in the other way, and then it lays flat. And so where we're going with the 7 points of mind training is to have ourselves look at all other beings as equal. So we make ourselves lower than everybody else to develop some humility, respect for other people, compassion for other people, loving kindness for other people, and so forth. There are different sections in the mind training teachings, and this slogan is number 55. And it comes in the last section, which is guidelines for mind training. And this is taking mind training into your everyday life. Tong Len is a practice that many of you are familiar with, and that comes early in the series of slogans. And that is taught, at least originally, when you're in the cushion, on the cushion in your shrine room. But this is what to do no matter where you are. So it's taking him into your life after you are up off of the cushion or before you get on the cushion. And there's a difference between mind training and mind taming, that we start out with taming our minds through partially sitting meditation. Many of you have cats and dogs, and you may realize, if you are a cat owner, that it's darn near impossible to train a cat. At least that's been my experience. The cats train you, but a dog can be trained. And so getting back to the taming aspect here versus the training, what the taming does is it calms our mind down. It tames our mind so it is not jumping around so much with all kinds of wild thoughts. And so when you are a beginning meditator, one of the first things that you realize is that my mind is jumping around all over the place. And you frequently think, I can't meditate. This is impossible. In fact, if you're receiving instructions in a room with other people, you think, maybe I should get up, but that would be embarrassing. But that is the first experience that we have when we meditate, is we become aware of how wild our minds are and how difficult it is to focus on an object of the mind. When I came to meditation, I was an avid listener to rock and roll, both my own music and radio stations. And I quickly came to realize with meditation that I couldn't even concentrate on a rock and roll song, that very quickly after the first few notes, my mind would be off wandering in thoughts. And if I would listen to a station all day long, I couldn't tell you what songs I listened to even frequently. I mean, that's what I'm talking about in terms of an untamed mind. Needless to say, I quickly realized that the content of the songs that I was listening to was all about our afflictive states of mind. anger, attachment, uh, indifference, denial, and so on and so forth. And I literally quit listening to music that had words. And I started paying attention to how listening to a particular song made me feel. I'm kind of leading you in the direction of what this slogan is talking about. So taming the mind means that we develop a mind that is calmer, that is distracted less. Doesn't mean you're undistracted. When you're meditating, what's important is at the end of the session, were you more distracted than usual? And if you go, yes, I say that's good because you were aware that you were more distracted than usual. And if you decide that I was less distracted than usual, good, because you were aware that you were less distracted than usual. And if you say, well, this is about the usual amount of distraction, good, because you were aware that this was the usual amount of distraction. This is the point of shamatha meditation, to increase your awareness of where your mind is and what's it doing. A misconception of taming the mind is that you're supposed to go into a zone of, let's say, no thoughts or bliss, or you just kind of space out and there's no awareness, or to kind of put it into a few words, an altered state of consciousness. And of course, the problem is that what the Buddha taught is that we are already in an altered state of consciousness, and the path leads to an unaltered state of consciousness. So meditation is intended for our minds to settle down, to be distracted less. It doesn't mean that you are not distracted, but it takes more to distract you, and the length of time that you are distracted before you come back in the long run becomes shorter. Again, it's like the stock market. Sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes it's flat because it's closed on the weekends. I'm not sure if there's an analogy here to that part with meditating. Maybe that's when you space out. But anyway, the point is that our minds are volatile, and we're just looking for less volatility. So that is the point of mind training. Mind training makes our minds clearer. Like the classic example is a jar of muddy water. And so if you take a jar of muddy water, imagine it here in my hand, and you are shaking it, agitating it, you've got muddy water. But if you would set it down on something and let it sit for a few hours, the mud settles to the bottom of the jar and the natural clarity of the water appears. Nothing has to be done. Just leave it alone. And that is the point of sitting, that as our mind settles down, that the natural clarity of our mind starts to appear. It's not an all or nothing situation, but little by little. And as that clarity appears and our ability to keep our mind focused develops, then enters mind training. And so here we are again curling ourselves up kind of into the other direction than we have been curled in from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime endlessly in the past up to the present. So now this slogan is intended to train our minds of what to do in post-meditation. And this particular slogan is meant to be a triggering mechanism to recall our attention to the present moment whenever we become distracted. You could call this a mindfulness practice. I like to think of this a bit like my car dashboard, that every so often this light lights up and it says maintenance required. And this slogan is intended to be used like that. We need to look in and apply some maintenance to our state of mind. I think we all know where we were before we came to Buddhism. And perhaps one of the reasons we came to Buddhism is that we realized we needed to do some maintenance on our mind. And so really this is what is intended with this last section of the 7 points of mind training. So the basic framework for where we are is that we are in a world that is made up of our projections. The world that we live in is different than the same world that the dog in your house or the cat in your house lives in. They see things very differently than we see things. We think that the way we see things is the right way, and the way the dogs see things is maybe the way the dog sees things, but dogs are dogs and cats are cats. And when it comes to people, we think that the way we see things are right, and the way some other people at least see things are wrong. And certainly at this level of Buddhism, there is the difference between right and wrong, but there also is this understanding as we progress along the path that the basic problem is duality, is taking that which is not a self to be a self, and that which is not other to be an other, that these are projections, and as a result, everything develops from that. Once we have self and then other, then we have comparisons. And then we have I like other, I dislike other, or I want to ignore other. And then you might say the race is on, that we just keep going around accepting this, rejecting that, denying that, being indifferent to that, and so on. And the important thing is to realize that all of this are the projections of a confused mind. And the path leads to cutting through all of this, that behind this confused mind is our ultimate essence, our Buddha nature, our primordial wisdom. That confusion does not come from one place and the ultimate come from another, but the confused mind, duality, and all these afflictive states of mind, the source is our ultimate essence, our primordial wisdom, but it's filtered through these mistakes, these clinging to these illusions. A Buddha, an enlightened being, would see how we see things, but realize that they are illusions. They are like a dream. And that since the Buddha means the awakened one, the Buddha would see the dream, but he would be awake and realize that it was a dream. So it's really important to understand this basic framework when you're going through your everyday situation. Now, as Lama Kathy said, I was a prison chaplain. And there is an interesting phenomena that happens with inmates. Now, I don't know if this story is real or not. It's up to you to decide. But the story is that at a prison somewhere in the United States, a guard in the guard tower calls on his radio to the security room and said, "There's an inmate climbing the fence." And the reply is, "Well, shoot him." And the guard says, "He's trying to get in." The point being that inmates get institutionalized. They get very comfortable being in prison. They're afraid of getting out. Some, in fact, are so wise to the system that when they do get released, when winter comes, they will commit a minor infraction and they're in jail all winter long, where they've got a place to stay and food and warmth. And then they get released sometime in the spring or summer, and then back again doing the same thing because they're so comfortable imprisoned. And we are all institutionalized to samsara. We're very comfortable. And if you remember here, it's find freedom. Sometimes the word liberation, liberate yourself through investigation and examination. The Tibetan word is the same. Sometimes it's freedom, sometimes it's liberate. But the point is that we have become so comfortable to samsara that even though we're suffering, it's very difficult to leave it. That we think that if we leave this, what we're used to, there's tremendous fear about where we are going, which is unknown. And it's very easy to keep slipping back into the old comfortable patterns. I don't know who said this, but I heard this once. Um, it was a person being interviewed on a news program, and it was, "The devil I know is better than the devil I don't know." And it's not Buddhist, but I think it defines this samsaric mentality of people who realize that they are suffering, but they don't see that there is a better way. And there's fear that is there about going into the unknown. And of course, we can't know where we are going in advance. So this is again where training our mind comes in. It trains our minds to look into things and examine them and then analyze them. That it is possible to see things differently, radically differently. So I'm going to open it up to questions at this point.
Lama Yeshe, so far there are no questions in the chat. Would you like me to allow everyone to unmute so they can ask verbally? If there
That's
are
fine. Yes, that's fine.
Okay, everyone, you have the power to unmute now if you would like to. And of course, you can also still put your question in the chat if you have one. And if you'd like me to read it anonymously, you can send it to me, to the Columbus KTC user, and I'll read it anonymously.
Here's one to break the ice. Yeshe. That inmate, did he get shot?
That was the where the story ended. I really don't know. I really don't know. But needless to say, I think the instructions are if a person is climbing, gotten that far, they're climbing the fence, it could be shoot. When I was at the prison, there was no rioting. There was no one climbing the fence. Quite honestly, I felt that the dangerous part of my job was driving to work in the wintertime. It was a 100-mile drive, and this is Wisconsin. That and disease, because the inmates led unhealthy lifestyles, many of them. And everything from sharing needles to just never going to the doctor. And so there would be lots of, they did TB testing of the staff every year. Mm-hmm. And so the inmates were, their health was much poorer than the population at large. And because of the US HIPAA rules, they could not tell you which inmate had what diseases. But again, I never caught any diseases from the inmates either.
Okay, thank you, Lama Yeshe.
Yes.
My question was not too stupid then.
Well, Rinpoche said this one time, because he was asked something like, I don't know how to ask a question, or I'm uncomfortable asking a question. I don't remember the exact question, but he said, there's no such thing as a bad question. And when you ask a question, frequently there are other people in the audience that have the same question, but they are not going to ask it. So that, again, he always encouraged questions.
Lama Yeshe, I received a question to read to you. It says, so to work through that fear of the unknown, is this where we trust in our guru to lead us into that unknown?
That's a very good question with a very good answer. And this brings back to devotion, which I talked about last night, is that as you travel the path, you develop more confidence in your own bodhicitta and your own primordial wisdom, your Buddha nature, your enlightened essence, and especially the teacher, confidence that the teacher, you can follow that teacher, that you, and this again develops over time. And this is kind of where, again, the question last night about Vajrayana. In Vajrayana, it's a much closer bond. This is where you really develop this samaya bond, where you are going to be following that teacher. This also means you have to be very, very careful examining the teacher before you develop this strong bond. Do I want to follow this teacher, even if he gives me instructions that are make me feel uncomfortable? And there also has to be this element of common sense that unfortunately, some teachers have gone in directions that lead the students away from the goal rather than towards the goal. And this has come out. But this is where we don't have to worry. We never had to worry about Khenpo Karta Rinpoche, Tai Situ Rinpoche, His Holiness the Karmapa. We've got very good, very trustworthy teachers out there, Khenpo Ujin, Khenpo Tenkyong, and so forth, that these are teachers that we can have confidence, trust, and devotion towards. So in a way, I really felt that this is one reason why Rinpoche set up Karme Ling, the 3-year retreat center, and encouraged his students to go there. Because that way you had this very close relationship with him, and that he could keep an eye on you and keep you going in the right direction. So there's a long answer to that very good question with a very short, good answer. I guess I'll add this about my own personal connection with Khenpo Karta Rinpoche. And because I've been thinking about him a lot since his parinirvana, but of course I thought about him a lot before. But I took refuge with him in 1988, literally a year after I first came in contact with the Dharma, and it was with Tibetan Buddhist Dharma. But I grew up in a traumatic household with a mother that was extremely domineering, demanding, would quickly go into rages that were directed towards me, and trying to control every aspect of my life. And when I came to Buddhism, well, I was very, very interested in it. I was a very sensitive person about people trying to control me, worried about people getting angry at me. I would react to the slightest feeling of anger directed towards me very negatively. Overreact might be a good word for it. And what I came to realize that Khenpo Karta Rinpoche was exactly the Lama, the guru, the teacher that I needed, because he was so gentle. He put up with a lot from me. And he always returned whatever you might say, gave him with kindness, gentleness, wisdom. And that was exactly the teacher that I needed at the time. And I still need him. I miss him. I pray to him. And perhaps this is the kind of teacher that many of you needed too. So I will finish at that point. And what's the next question?
Currently, there are no questions pending in the chat, but the participants still have the ability to unmute if they would like.
I do have a question, Lama. I can say I can relate to your background. I'm a survivor of childhood trauma. And I found that in my 50s, I've always kind of reacted in that realm. I'm always kind of in that trauma place, reacting through trauma. One of the things that you had mentioned in one of your previous answers was developing confidence and trust in your teacher. And confidence and trust are not things that I develop naturally in others. And that's been a big obstacle in me working with my teacher, working through my issues, because I really don't have that confidence and trust in myself. And it's so difficult to have that for the teachers that really want that for me.
Yeah, and that's again something that I have had to work with. That first, my mother was mentally ill, and Dad wanted someone to be dependent on him. And the last 6 years of their life, thanks to my Buddhist practice, I was able to view them gradually before that, so that I could let go of a lot of the animosity that I had towards them. And I actually told them to move up closer to me when they needed to move into an institution so that I could help take care of them. My brother called me up and said, "What? They're moving from Colorado up to Minnesota? People move south." And I told him, "Well, I invited them." And he went, "What? You did that?" But it was a very healing last 6 years of their lives. And I came to understand their pain more. And part of it was working with the trauma, was realizing that Mom was seriously mentally ill and delusional. And I actually asked Dad at one point a few years before that, because I started seeing them again. They always visited me because Mom was attached to me. I was her favorite. And the problem was that she, being her favorite, her attention was focused on me more. But anyway, I asked Dad one time, "Why didn't you leave her?" And this was coming out of the blue. There wasn't like there was a conversation leading up to this about how crazy Mom was, da, 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 da. And he just simply said, "She needed me." And when I look back, I mean, even when I was young, when I was in school, she could not have lived by herself on her own. She couldn't write out a check. So anyway, I came to realize working with inmates that she behaved a lot like inmates that had been sexually abused. And I just learned a couple of years ago, now her sisters are all gone, her brothers are all gone, her mother, everybody is dead in that generation. But one of my cousins said that her mother told her that there was somebody in the neighborhood that was a sexual predator. And when I started connecting the dots in the prison, I talked to a social worker about this. And the social worker said that if mom was, and she was paranoid about keeping the doors locked, the windows locked, the curtains closed, that if she was sexually assaulted, the predator was on the outside of the house, not the inside of the house. And I just started seeing mom differently. And so that helped me get rid of a lot of the anger and resentment, realizing that mom was totally under the control of her fear and her paranoia. And she was afraid of me doing something wrong that would hurt myself, and so forth. So forgiveness is a huge part of the process of letting go of the anger that you have towards the way you were treated. I am going to go into this a little bit more later on, but this is a good time to start. And that is, there are different ways you can look at yourself. You can look at yourself as a victim of trauma. You can look at yourself as a survivor of trauma, or you can look at yourself as a person that experienced trauma, and that it's one experience or a group of experiences that you've had, but they're just experiences that have happened to you in the past. If you're looking at yourself as a survivor, you're using it to define who you are. And if you're looking at yourself as a victim, that's even more of a problem, because then not only are you defining yourself as that, but when you're a victim, it leaves you powerless and helpless and hopeless, because there's nothing you can do about it. As one inmate told me, I was sexually assaulted when I was a little kid, and there's nothing I can do about it. And eventually he went to segregation because he was such of a behavior problem, because his anger was so strong. And from there, he went to a maximum security prison, again, because he couldn't control his anger about being hopeless and helpless. And boy, I hate to get into politics, but this is what has fed the attack on the Capitol. Everybody there was feeling a victim. And there are these conspiracies out there that we have no control over, and we are mad, and it's time that we do something about it. And so it's really important to realize that what you're dealing with is not what happened, but your psychological response to what happened, and that you have the control to redefine what happened. And that's when you take back the control. That's when you empower yourself. So this is a very good point, that there have been scientific studies that have shown that when we bring up a memory, look into it deeply. This is, by the way, examining an analysis. Look at that deeply, see exactly what was going on, and then kind of redefine the conclusion from that memory. Then it goes back in, and this is like reprogramming the software. You're putting in, you've actually changed it. There are studies, brain waves and activity within the brain and so forth. And this is what actually happens. And so it's really good. Quite honestly, there was an inmate that he worked for me in the chapel department. And he was of Puerto Rican descent from Chicago and had been a gang member, formed a very vicious gang in Chicago, and then finally fled because the way you work up in a gang is you assassinate the leader, kind of like the Godfather. And the word got out that he was going to be targeted, and instead of fight it, he fled. But you know, he led a life of crime and eventually got incarcerated, and now he's in prison and he's working for me. And I decided to, we had a chapel video center, and I decided to do something differently, and that was focus partially on psychology as well as religion. And so I worked with another chaplain. So I had the Department of Correction buy the video Antoine Fisher. Some of you maybe are familiar, most of you aren't. Directed by Denzel Washington. He's in it, and it's about this Black man who is in the Navy, and he ends up seeing Denzel Washington, naval psychiatrist, and going through his life. And there are all these flashbacks about this traumatic childhood he had. So anyway, the video comes, and it's after supper and things have quieted down in the chapel. My worker is there, and I tell him, go bring the TV. It's on a cart, you know, with the DVD deal on it. Put that in there, and because I want to review it before I put it in the library. I had seen it years ago, and I just wanted to see it, among other things, but I did want to review it for appropriateness. And so he did that, put the DVD in the player, and then he left. And then a few minutes later, he came back with something that he wanted me to do. And while I'm doing that, you know, filling out some paperwork, he starts watching. And I'm done, and he keeps on watching. And he keeps on watching. And I let him watch, and he watched the whole movie. He stood up and watched the whole movie for, I don't know, 90 minutes, 120 minutes. He went home then, back to his room. Next morning he came and he said, you know, I went back to my room. I sat on my bed and I started thinking and thinking and thinking. And the next thing I knew, the sun rose. And then he started writing, and he started writing down, this is where I'm going with this. He started writing down his experiences, and he showed them to me. I think he had a total of 2-3 pages. But he was a different person after that. And what I'm recommending is examining, analyzing, even writing down to help you grasp what actually happened to you, your feelings, and so forth. And this story has a good ending. He was transferred to another prison, and then he was transferred back to my prison. I worked a total of 8 years, and he was released. And about a year after he was released, I get a call from him. It probably was illegal. I probably should have written up an incident report. I didn't. But he said this, I'm back in Chicago. I've got a job, and I'm in a vocational school training. And he was so delighted. You know, this was for him a totally new course of action. But and so this was, you might say this was a trigger for him, that it brought up all of this stuff. He was able to write it down. He was able to look at it differently, and he's able to, and he never came to any of my Buddhist programs. I never taught him meditation, but just the very fact of re-examining what had happened in a totally different light. So it's really good to examine and analyze things. And I'm going to go into that, of course, in much greater detail. But as you can see by the length of time I've spent on this, I thought this was very good. Hope this helps.
It does very much. My GPS is automatically programmed to Trauma Town, and I'm trying so desperately to do that work to redirect it. And you make a good point about that. But another obstacle for me in particular is that it oftentimes those thoughts going back to those thoughts, physical pain accompanies it as well, and so it's like a psychophysiological response that makes it even tougher to overcome.
Yeah, I would go to school in the morning with scabs on me from what happened the night before. And I'm talking about when I'm 15 years old. So I had a very difficult childhood. In a way, it's amazing that I didn't behave worse than I did at that time of my life. Yes, I can have physical reactions. Another movie, the other chaplain ordered later on, had a scene in it, and again, it had a good message to it, but had a scene in it of a mother, I forget what she was beating the child with, but beating a teenage son, probably with a belt, to the point where he was on the ground and she was still hitting him. And what surprised me was, here I was in around the age of 60. And when that scene was over with, I was like this, you know, it was like I was in that scene. And so I can relate to this little by little by little. But the point is to avoid making excuses. I am the way I am because of someone else. The proper approach is it's experience, and all you're having now is a memory, and it's your memory, and to own that memory. And the other is that I like, this is an analogy with modern technology, is you install those buttons that get pushed, and you can learn how to uninstall those buttons and transform them. What I have realized is that my childhood experience is what led me to Buddhism, that I was suffering so much that I realized this is a terrible place to be, and I don't like being here. Literally, when I came to my first meditation session, my first meditation instruction, my first meeting with a teacher was when I was still seeing a psychiatrist for acute depression and on a very strong antidepressant, not the kinds you see advertised. If you want to know, it was phenylzine sulfate. Nardil is the brand name, and it's a very strong antidepressant. And one of the side effects is if you eat the wrong kind of food, you have a stroke and you die. And it required a very strict dietary regimen. And like I couldn't have anything with yeast in it. And that made beer impossible. And I happened to like beer at that time. Now I'm a monk, I have vows. I leave that alone. But the point is that I was in a very bad place. And fortunately, actually the Nardil really helped me. What it did for me anyway, and I'm not saying anyone else would react this way, but what it did is it was so strong, it pulled me out of the depression, and suddenly I was almost overactive. People thought that I was taking speed because busy, 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 do this, do that, da, 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 you know, frantic, compulsive. But I wasn't depressed. I wasn't sleeping 16 hours a day. I wasn't having all these thoughts of how bad a person I am and how bad the world was. But that's where I started from when I came to Buddhism. And it gave me the energy to pursue it. And one of the first things I learned was, you are creating the world that you live in through your thoughts. And if you don't like where you are, then change your thoughts. Let go of your thoughts. Even if it is, oh mani padme hung, oh mani padme hung. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go back to the breath, but if you don't like your thoughts, and this again is this dashboard light, check maintenance required, then start looking at some other thoughts, even if it is Om Mani Padme Hung, visualizing Chen Rezi, Tong Len. You know, there are just so many different things that we can go when we realize I'm in a bad place right now and I want to do something right now to get out of it. Does this help you?
Very much. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm going to go back to the talk. Oh, Lalani, did you have a question?
Not a question, but just to say thank you, because I found that very helpful also. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now what I want to do is I looked at 4 different books on the 7 points of mind training, and most of them are very short in their instructions on this point. So the first one I'm just going to read. This comes from The Great Path of Awakening by Jamgon Kongtrul I. You must find freedom from disturbing emotions and ego clinging by constantly examining and investigating your course of experience. Therefore, turn your attention to an object that gives rise to disturbing emotions. Examine carefully whether they arise or not. If they do arise, apply remedies vigorously. Again, look at ego clinging, see what it is like. If it appears that no ego clinging is present, examine it again in reference to an object of attachment or aversion. If ego cherishing then arises, immediately stop it with the remedy of exchanging yourself with others. So that is very, very succinct. So to go back to the last question, it might be bring up a memory and see, does this remedy or this memory bring up disturbing emotions? And then, of course, if it does, do Tong Len. This might be very difficult to do. But do Tong Len if it's at all possible for that person that this disturbing emotion is related to. And again, with my mother, not only did I begin seeing her not as a torturer, a mad person, but I started also seeing her as how I have benefited from her. And I have benefited from her and Dad in many different ways. When I have a clearer mind and don't have the anger there to filter these thoughts through. I always had plenty of food growing up. I had good health care. We lived in nice houses and areas of the city and so forth. And actually, I did learn some things from them that have been beneficial throughout life. And I'm not going to go on there, but I mean, if we look at people that we have aversion for, we can find that they are suffering, and this is one reason why they are behaving the way they are. And if nothing else, they are a way of an object that helps us develop patience, helps us develop forgiveness, helps us develop tolerance, and so forth. And in terms of ego clinging, what frequently happens is that we think that we are, well, here is one of my favorites, and that is this is an unrealistic expectation in life. And the expectation is life should be fair, and I am the one that determines what is fair. And of course, we don't know about our past lives. We do not know what we have done in past lives. Our present situation is primarily a result of cause and effect due to what we have done in past lives. Now, this can be interpreted as blaming the victim, and I'm not using it that way. All of us, every single last one of us, have been in all 6 of the realms of samsara, and we have done everything from the beginningless beginning. And as a result, we have a tremendous amount of karma that we have accumulated. And so it's important to realize this, that in terms of life being fair, it might be fairer than you think. And what you're experiencing is a result of your karma. So to move on here, let's see, we are going to, I guess, about another 20 minutes, according to my calculations. So I'll go a little bit further and then I'll open it up to one more question and answer session. So about the word freedom here, it's good to ask yourself, am I stuck or do I have freedom now? When I change the channel, do you find yourself in the same soap opera? To bring it into contemporary terms. Or is it a different program? I can tell you this is something that I realized very quickly, is that when I started meditating, is that I kept changing the channel and find myself in the same soap opera, and I kept blaming other people. And when I realized that, oh, it's not them, it's me, things began to change for me. You know, and it's not that I'm totally free, but at least I don't get stuck like I used to get stuck. what I came to realize is that if you're not happy before you get what you want, you won't be happy after you get what you want, at least not for long. And then it is back to the same old, same old. And what the samsaric response is, when we are unhappy with things, to resort to the same old habits, the same old afflictive states of mind. And the approach is kind of, if it isn't working, do more of it until it does work. So investigation is analyzing in general terms. Examination is detailed analysis. In Buddhism, at least Tibetan Buddhism, it's actually very similar to scientific examination if you really get into the details of Buddhist logic. And quite honestly, I've got a book class that meets on Tuesday night, and recently we went through Buddhist logic, and the general consensus was it's making my head spin. All the different schools and traditions and approaches and so on and so forth. But if you really like this sort of thing, get into Madhyamaka, the Prajnaparamita, and so forth, and it really helps us examine in very great detail and very precisely. And of course, the examination is of our own mind rather than other people and outer objects. I like to say that sometimes when you are attending a Buddhist talk, you might think, I wish Joe Smith were here because he really needs to hear this. And of course, what this means is that you really need to hear this. And you are deflecting. You are projecting. It's amazing how the faults we see in other people frequently are our own faults. And so when you start seeing faults in other people, it's really good to take a time out and then look within and say, do I ever act that way, think that way, talk that way? And this is where the examination and analysis comes into play. So it's really important to get to know ourselves, to become friends with yourself. Become friends with every aspect of yourself, the neurotic, confused self. To nurture yourself rather than be a, what would I say, a drill sergeant. To actually nurture yourself, comfort yourself. Many of us have a wounded 10-year-old inside of ourselves. And to give comfort to that wounded child, to nurture that wounded child, to help comfort the fear and the pain of that wounded child. And so when you become friends with yourself and you see these different aspects of yourself, it's also important to remember that while you are friends, sometimes your friend gives you bad advice and you don't have to listen to it. So with that, I would like to open it back up to questions and answers.
Lama Yeshe, there was a kind of just a short discussion going on in the chat. I'm not sure whether it's an outstanding question. Helder, did you want to ask that question of Lama Yeshe?
Hi, Lama. It was just about, I have this idea, but this is, I think it's mine, or maybe, some other people may have, but when we reach the realization or the nirvana, like the work is gonna stop. Like we're gonna just reach and then we relax in this state of, like blissful or whatever. So the, I have this idea to be always like be working and working on myself and learning and all that, and then reach nirvana, and then everything's gonna be like perfect and no more thing to do, just kind of relax. This was my idea, my discussion.
Yeah, well, what in the Mahayana tradition and the Vajrayana tradition, when you reach the ultimate, you see that you are beyond samsara and nirvana, that samsara and nirvana is dualistic. And so from the Vajrayana, it is that we go beyond duality entirely. And that would also be beyond concepts of relaxation. That actually, at this point, you are totally dedicated to benefiting other beings. And so you might say you're beyond relaxation and the opposite of relaxation. You're just beyond concepts. So this comes more from the foundational vehicle, the idea of nirvana, that you go from samsara to nirvana. Does that help you?
Yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense, because you just get release of all this, like you said, the concepts. You're not relaxing, you're not working, you're just being something else.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of misunderstanding about Buddhism, and there are a lot of different schools. And the foundational level, you're working with yourself, your own confusion, your own suffering, and so forth. This is where you're working on taming your mind. And then in the Mahayana, we have tamed our mind to the point where we start seeing other people are suffering. To use an example, again, of my work in the prison, when I was there, I had regular classes and regular meditation. And some of the inmates would attend, and some of them would actually do meditation in their rooms. And one day an inmate came to my program and he said, there's a lot of suffering in this institution here. Even the guards are suffering. And that's when he entered the, you might say, the Mahayana. His mind had calmed down, so he wasn't seeing just his suffering or the suffering of the other inmates. He was starting to see the guards, who it would be easy to see as the enemy, that they were suffering too. And so that's the Mahayana. And then when you get into the Vajrayana, it's like we see this non-duality of samsara and nirvana, that we're actually going to the state of Vajradhara, which is the primordial Buddha, primordial mind, our primordial essence. So to put it simply, that is the goal, is the state of Vajradhara, like in the end of the Mahamudra lineage supplication.
Yes, thank you, Lama. Thank you.
Lama Yeshe, Caitlin posted in the chat a question on the same topic, and says, I've wondered that too. For some reason, that makes me think of this question. if one of the four thoughts that turns the mind to the Dharma is to be dissatisfied with samsara, but also samsara and nirvana are inseparable, how does that work? It feels like we should be working to see the sacred in every part of samsara, but also be dissatisfied with samsara at the same time.
Yes, well, this is when we get to transforming confusion into wisdom. And so we do not have two separate sources. We don't have something that is creating samsara and something that is creating nirvana. That it is all mind. Mind creates samsara, mind creates nirvana, and of course it is mind that is the state of Vajradhara, Dorje Chang. And so what we need to do is see that samsara works on the basis of karma. And therefore we have to know the difference between right and wrong. We have to understand that when we behave certain ways, there will be consequences, good consequences or negative consequences, bad consequences. And so we have to realize this and we have to behave accordingly, but we have to realize that ultimately it's an illusion. To put it in simple terms, if you go out, there's a lot of interstate highway in the Columbus area. I've been there a number of times. You have them circling, you have them going through the city. And if you go on the interstate and just stand there, there's a very high likelihood that an illusory car would come and hit your illusory body, and you would experience a lot of illusory pain, and you would probably have an illusory death. But I don't think any of you want to live that illusion. And so we stay off of dangerous places in samsara, that an enlightened being will realize this is all an illusion, but this is the way this illusion works. And so an enlightened being would see both samsara and see it as a pure land, but would realize that the illusion is not the pure land, but samsara, and that while you're in samsara, it's best to be, keep the rules of karma in consideration, and also the way other people look at you. That Tralag Rinpoche talks about a conventional ego or a functional ego. That's the word, functional ego. That so even someone like him or Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, they behave in a certain way because you need to behave in a certain way to function in samsara. Does this help?
Yeah, so samsara is sort of the system of karma, and the Pure Land is there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the Pure Land is right here, but we do not perceive it. And so the Pure Land would be, when we finish the mantra repetition in Chenrezi, we re-arise as Chenrezi, and we try to take the approach that all sound is his mantra, and this is his pure realm, and that we are Chenrezi. So it is taking this approach. But again, you do also see that there are cars out there, and you don't want to get hit by cars. And when you're driving your car, you want to drive on the right side of the road, because that's what conventional driving is, and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
I like there's my joke now. I hope this goes over better than the first one. And that is, if you have no self, can you still use the self-serve gas pump? And I'll let you answer that. Whoever in the audience heard that, that's just keep it to yourself. Yes. Any other questions?
Lama Yeshe, there's a new question in the chat now. Katie asks, she says, thank you, and then says, if we maintain a functional ego, how do we achieve a state of egolessness?
Well, again, it is a this functional self functions in samsara, but it realizes this is an illusion, that it's not solid, and that we are, you might say, coming from the ultimate, understanding that all of this is illusory and that you are not self versus other, but this is how you need to behave to function in samsara. There are stories about crazy wisdom yogis that behave totally unconventionally. And Khenpo Gangchar is an example of that. And Rinpoche has talked from time to time about Khenpo Gangchar. And the point is that an enlightened being does not necessarily behave in a way that makes sense to us ordinary samsaric beings. But most do, because of it makes them easier to have a relationship with us ordinary confused beings. My first teacher was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and quite honestly, he died a week after my first meditation instruction from one of his students. But I stayed with that Sangha until 89 when I became a student of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. But the stories I heard about Chogyam Trungpa, you just didn't know what he was going to be doing the next moment. I remember listening to a cassette tape. You remember cassette tapes, those of you that are older. And when it came to the question and answer session, somebody said, I want to know more about the guru. And by coincidence, in the background, there was this thunderclap. And then there was this total nervous laugh from the audience, like they weren't sure if he caused this thunderclap. Because that's the way he was. He behaved very bizarrely. Another story I heard of him is that he took one of his attendants, let's go to Hawaii. So they flew to Hawaii, checked into a hotel, and he spent the whole time there sitting in his room, looking at his wall. Probably, in what I know now is he was probably doing Mahamudra meditation and who knows what. But this is what you would call bizarre behavior, flying to Hawaii, going to a hotel, and then looking at the wall. And most teachers, and this is what I appreciate about Khenpo Rinpoche, is he was predictable. His functional self was this very kind, gentle person that was very wise, very loving, and had fantastic teachings. But this was his conventional self. Functional self. Let me keep that straight. And so that's what I'm talking about, is he understood emptiness. He rested in emptiness, I'm going to say. and I'm speculating here, but this is where he was coming from, was emptiness, and then he then related to us samsaric beings at the level that we were at with a functional self. I see a hand that somebody wants a question.
Lama Yeshe, yes, Helder had a question. Let's see, it's 11:34 Eastern time. Would you like this to be the last question before we take our break?
I think so.
Okay.
We'll have the afternoon for more
Right.
more of this.
Okay, so Helder, if you still would like to ask that question, feel free, and that'll be our last one.
I actually pressed the wrong button, but I can ask the question. So samsara is like the system, like the matrix, like we see in the movie, that runs in the earth. Is there such a possibility that you're living in the earth but not living in samsara? Because I ask because of the Buddha saying when he reached enlightenment and he said, "The earth is my witness." So can you be here without being in samsara?
Well, yeah, you definitely be here without being in samsara, and that's these enlightened masters that we have had actual physical contact with, or read their books, or now because of YouTube and Facebook, there's a tremendous amount of videos available of their teachings. But a highly enlightened master is going to see this as a pure land that is full of enlightened beings. But we ordinary people have not made a connection to our ultimate essence, our primordial wisdom, our Buddha nature. And so while our essence is and always has been enlightened and the ultimate, we have not made that connection. And the path is trying to clarify confusion and ultimately transforming confusion into wisdom, because the confusion comes from the same place as wisdom, and it's a matter of transformation. Not in a way, ultimately, it's transforming it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to get my copy of the prayers, and we can do these concluding prayers, and then we'll come back at 1 o'clock your time. Om Swasti Rabjam Gyalwe Kudang Yeshe Ki Trin Le Gyam So Nam Tar Kyon Wei Wang Du Sum Kun Ken Gyal Wang Karma Pe Sha Pe Ten Shing Se Trien Pe Par Shok De Den Shingi Gon Po Nang Tai Yi Sam Shen Ngo Tsar Tro Pe Do Gar Gi Ten Pe Gyal San Drang Ki Gar Gi Wang Sun Me Gon Ma Rim Jo Nam La Du Si Ji Mi Pam Zung Juk Dor Che Kor Do Ne Drup Kyang Dak Se Sol Ton Pa Jam Chen Yao Wei Do Gar Si Tu Pe Sha Pe Ten Ching Zay Trin Ke Par Shok Moon Pe Mun Jom Can Ter Chok Sol Wa Jam Yak Non An Ten Pe Sok Ching Che Ning Me Gon Gur Jam Gon Lama Ye Sha Pe Ten Ching Zay Trin Ke Par Shok Do Me Mi She Tig Le Chen Po Tsel De Tong Dorji Gyar Ken Sang Wei Dak Gang Dul Kornang Go Shri Gyal Sape Sha Pei Ten Shing Zai Trin Kei Par Shok Nang Si Zil Non Zhong Ji Rang Wang Jor Dor J Kun A Trin A Kor Lo Yor Pei Jun No Nang Pao Den Pao Wo Che Sha Pei Ten Shing Zai Trin Kei Par Shok Say Pak Me Pei Ye Shi Yu Trul Ni Top K Shop Yang Quin Lei Lun Zo Paul Pen De Sa La Tre Ho Tro Pe Ku Sha Pei Ten Shing Zai Trin Ke Par Shok De Tar Mi Che Gu Pei Sol Top Tu La Me Jin Lap Sem La Juk Pa Dang Sang Sung Nam Tar Yon Ten Gam So Yun Tam Che Ma Lu Da Ki Kyo Nu Shok Pen De Pun Sok Ma Lu Jung Wei Go Gal Wei Ten Pa Yun Du Ne Pa Dang De Zhen She Dang Ge Pei Du De Kun Chu Chu Nam Chu Ja Wa Kun Pel Sok Grel La To Gra So Tro Kun Du Di Ne De Chen Ning Po Lang So Men Gi Bar Bar Che Ngir Se Dri Yi Ma Go Sheng Kao Zang Cho Den Sam Kun Lun Drup Shok Si Pe De Jor Dan Gi Mi Lam Shen Nok Chung Ning Po Me Pe Ton Tok Ne Nem Ner Dra Wei Dam Cho Drup Pa La Zol Me Son Pa Chen Po Juk Yor Chik Rang Sem San J Yin Par Tak Chu Ching Sem Ni Kong Cha Lun Drup Rang Drol Du Tog Ne Kor De Re Do Kun Ral Te Chang Drol Da Pa On Yung Tok Yor Chi De Chen So Ki Kor Lo Tak Rol Pa Du Sum Yao Wei Ter Chen Karma Pa Yap Se Yu Par Che Pe Chi So Dear Kalpa Kalpe Bar Du Jap Ten So Gangi Zat Sang Sung Gi Sang Wala To Sam Drup Pe Ning Por Je Pa Yi Kong Dang Lok Pe De Nam Tam She Ni Yar Yi Chu Wo Ta Bor Ke Gu Jig Lama Rinpoche La Sol Wa Dep Dak Shin Lo Yi Tong War Jin Ye Lop Gu Me Yu La Ke War Jin Ge Lop Chu Min Nam Tok Gak Par Jin Je Lop Rang Sem Ke Me Tok Par Jin Ge Lop Tro Pa Rang Char Si War Jin Je Lop Nang Si Cho Kur Tok Par Jin Je Lop Lama Kukang Zang War Sol Wa Dep Chok Tu Kut Se Ring La Sol Wa Dep Krin Le Dar Sing Ge La Sol Wa Dep Lama Dang Grel Wa Me Par Jin Ge Lo Paul Dan Lama Ja Pe Ten Pa Dang Kan Yam Yo Na De Ki Jung Wa Dang Tak Shen Ma Lu Suk Sap Drip Chang Ne Nurdu Sanjay Sala Go Par Shok Sanjay Kusum Ne Pe Jin Lap Dang Choni Min Gur Dan Pe Jin Lap Dang Gen Dun Mi Che Dun Pe Jin Lap Ki Chi Tar Ngo Wa Mo Nam Drup Yor Chi Jam Pa Pa Wo Chi Tar Kien Pa Dang Kun Tu Zang Po De Yang De Jin Te De Da Kun Gi Je Su Tak Lok Cheng Ke wa di da tam she rap tu no. Du shi le gao gao wei trian le pa. Karma pa ten ten pe ning po de. Chok tar kun kyap kyap ching gun mi che. Tak para pel pel wei ta shi sho. That completes this morning's session. I appreciate all the questions. They've been very good. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in 1 o'clock, which is about an hour and 15 minutes away. So have a good lunch and see you very soon. Bye now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lama.
You.